While they claim to care about the safety of Canadians, the fact is, since this government was elected, gun crimes have gone up steadily every year. They talk a big game, but the fact is they've ignored gun safety and put politics first at every opportunity. Now they want to allow violent offenders to avoid jail and serve their sentences in their communities with their victims. Why is this government so committed to putting criminals ahead of victims?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, we have introduced Bill C-5 to attack systemic overrepresentation of Black and Indigenous peoples in our criminal justice system. It attacks minimum mandatory penalties and allows conditional sentence orders where public safety is not in danger, where incarceration is not the best either for the community or the victim or the perpetrator, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, with respect to violent crime, we've increased penalties with respect to guns trafficking and guns, and we have, as has been pointed out, introduced bold legislation capping handguns in this country.
Full member for Calgary-Midnapore.
You know, Mr. Speaker, Conservative MPs would welcome an honest discussion about how gun crime has gone up every year since this government was elected. The fact is, their legislation, C-5, eliminates mandatory jail time for violent gun crime and allows for criminals to serve their sentences in the comfort of their own homes, something their victims can no longer do. So why is this government so committed to putting criminals ahead of victims?
Minister.
Speaker, nothing could be further from the truth. Let's have an honest discussion. Serious offenses, Mr. Speaker, will always have serious consequences in our system. The kinds of penalties that we're attacking by eliminating certain minimum mandatory penalties, by allowing conditional sentence orders, are precisely those kinds of sentences where a person, the community, victims are not served, where the problem is something else, a health problem, a problematic addiction, for example. Mr. Speaker, we're moving ahead with these reforms to address systemic overrepresentation of Black and Indigenous peoples in the system to make the system more just.
The member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Speaker, Canadian research shows that when the extreme intoxication defence was available, it was successful in 30% of cases. 71% of these cases involved male violence against women. Yesterday, we heard from the Minister of Justice that this defence would only be used in a small minority of cases. But I want to remind the Minister, even one is too many. The lack of an immediate response from this government in Canada is dangerous. When will this Liberal government take the direction of the Supreme Court and close this loophole?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, as I said to the honourable member, and I want to reassure Canadians first and foremost that this defence is in fact available in only a very small fraction of cases. Nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, we are looking at the Supreme Court decision. We understand the seriousness of the situation, Mr. Speaker, and I can assure all parliamentarians in this House and indeed all Canadians that we are looking at ways in order to address the situation.
The Honourable
Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister talks a big game when it comes to public safety, but he's clearly being lax in this area. For example, his changes to the parole board resulted in the release of a violent criminal who murdered Marlène Lévesque. In addition, federal inmates now have access to needles, but drug trafficking in penitentiaries continues to increase, and now C-5 will let dangerous criminals serve their sentences at home instead of in a penitentiary. The Prime Minister has rolled out the red carpet for criminals. What's he done recently for the victims? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we stand with the victims and we are improving with the justice system, in fact, to help victims as well as to help Canadian society. With Bill C-5, we are addressing the issue of overrepresentation of Blacks and Indigenous peoples in the system. In cases where public safety is not an issue, is not under jeopardy, with conditional sentences and the elimination of certain mandatory minimums, we can address the real issues, helping the victims and helping society. The member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. talking about tackling the real problems, if we talk about illegal gun trafficking, which is a scourge in Canada, instead of getting to the root of the problem, the Prime Minister is attacking law-abiding people. Law enforcement has repeatedly said that culprits are street gangs and organized crime that operate in different parts of Canada using passages like the Aquanasne Reserve. It's no secret that this is the busiest border crossing in Canada. Why has the Prime Minister not yet met with the Chief of the Reserve on this issue to work with him to address the problem of illegal weapons in our streets?
Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would remind the honourable member that the chief from Aquasasne actually appeared at the Public Safety Committee and was able to present their concerns on the border. Last year, CBSA seized a record number of illegal firearms. We realize we have to do more, which is why we invested over $350 million in law enforcement to stop the flow of illegal gun trafficking. And what did the Conservatives do? They opposed these investments. When it comes to protecting our borders from illegal gun trafficking, the Conservatives are all talk and no action.
The honourable member for Portneuf-Chartres. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals' soft-on-crime approach only benefits criminals. Liberal softness is excessive tolerance for lawbreakers. And the poor victims? Our kids aren't even protected. This government is not sensitive to law-abiding citizens and their safety. A responsible government needs to strengthen public safety. Why is this government favoring criminals at the expense of the victims?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We do have a plan when it comes to public safety, and I'm always curious why the Conservatives say they're the party that supports victims, unless those victims are the victims of gun crime, and then they're demonized and they support the gun lobby in attacking them. We put in place stronger background checks. The Conservatives oppose them. We invested over $350 million in law enforcement to prosecute gangs and stop trafficking at the border. The Conservatives opposed it. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to keeping Canadians safe and keeping guns out of hands of criminals, the Conservatives have no plan, and we do.
The honourable member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, Canada is a paradise for the mafia. That's what last week former Italian prosecutor Roberto Scarpatino said, and he fought the mafia all his life. When an Italian prosecutor says that Canada is a magnet because it's easier for a mafia man to get rich here than elsewhere, it's time to get moving. Canada is a paradise for all criminal groups, and that's why we need a registry of criminal organizations to identify them and facilitate police work. This morning, I introduced Bill C-279 to create this registry. Will the government support it?
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
We're working closely with the Quebec government to reduce gun violence, and the Minister of Public Safety recently attended a forum in Montreal. We've directed $40 million under our Guns and Gangs funds to the Legault government. We're finalizing a transfer under our Building Safer Communities Fund to prevent gun crime, specifically for Quebec. And the Minister continues to engage directly with his counterparts in Quebec.
The honourable member for Rivière-du-Nord. They're so effective, Mr. Speaker, that yesterday in Laval, a mafia associate was shot in a restaurant in front of children. C-21 is clearly not curbing conflict between crime groups. The source of the wave of shootings in Montreal is organized crime. It imports illegal weapons and then uses them in our streets. The government needs to face this reality and help the police deal with this scourge. Do members of the government understand the urgency of creating a registry of criminal organizations?
Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sorry, Mr. Speaker. We do take the issue of gun safety very seriously, and that's why we introduced a bill this week that is going to bring in the strongest measures that we've seen in a generation, including a freeze on handguns, the #1 gun that is used in crime. We're taking the issue seriously. We're working with stakeholders across the country, including the police, to make sure that we keep Canadians safe.
The honourable member for Rheal du Nord. Unfortunately, that's nothing logical. What is being proposed is nothing new. It's the same principle that applies to the terrorist organizations registry. Right now, being a member of a recognized terrorist organization is illegal and punishable by arrest. Last year alone, the government added 13 groups to the registry, including the Proud Boys. All the better. But why is the government treating crime gangs, motorcycle gangs, the mafia and street gangs more lightly? If the minister believes that a registry is useful to fight terrorism, doesn't he think it would also be as useful to fight against organized crime?
Parliamentary Secretary.
And I'd like to take a moment to thank the honourable member for his passion on this issue and his advocacy on the issue. It is important. That's why we've brought forward legislation that will keep guns out of the hands of criminals. We also put in place background checks when we introduced Bill C-71. We're investing in law enforcement to prosecute gangs and stop trafficking at the border. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the issue of gun violence, this government is taking action, and I'm proud to stand on the record that we have.